Reverse by Black K. Cat. Chapter 44. Remians.
Not going to wander into gloat?
Kisame asks, amused, as he steps out of the deep shadows near the hallway's bend. The Uchiha doesn't look away from Orochimaru's retreating figure, his entire body almost eerily still.
"They're puppets,"
he says, not quite dismissive, but certainly close, and Kasame's grin widens.
"There's no use grandstanding in front of dolls."
With a low chuckle, Kasame braces a shoulder against the stone of the wall and looks down at his leader. His long hair is pulled back in a tail today, thick and spiky, and Kasame idly wonders if it feels as rough as it looks. Hopefully not, or the man will have more in common with Zetsu's cactus imitation than is good for anyone.
You don't trust the snake man,
he says, more statement than question. The Uchiha snorts softly, finally turning his eyes back to Kasame.
"Of course not,"
he answers.
"Orochimaru is planning something, and he has his own agenda. He's only been allowing ours because it suits his purposes."
Kasame doesn't have to ask why the man recruited him if that's the case. Orochimaru is a genius, incredibly knowledgeable in almost every area of study, and lacks the morals that might trip up another man. He's likely one of the most valuable, useful shinobi in the elemental countries, his personal goals aside. The fact that Kana chased him out kind of makes Kasame want to scratch his head, because the sheer strategic value of a man like Orochimaru has to outweigh a lot of flaws. Then again, Kisame's always found Kana a little bewildering to begin with. Kiri might not have been the nicest of places, but at least on the whole they never pretended to be anything but what they were.
I'll keep an eye out,
he volunteers, even though the Uchiha likely already has that covered. An extra set of watchful eyes can never hurt. The offer gets him a faint tip of the Uchiha's head, partway between silent thanks and acknowledgement.
"Check the control cells he's building as soon as you get the opportunity,"
is all he says, however.
"Uzumaki Kushina was one of the best Fuinjutsu masters in Fire Country. If there are any holes, intentional or otherwise, I want them covered."
Which is the perfect lead-in to something Kasame's been wondering about.
"Quite the powerhouses you picked to bring back,"
he promised, not quite expecting an answer to the unspoken question, but wanting to hear one anyway. Emotional sabotage is one thing. Resurrecting two of the most famous shinobi Kasame's heard of is another entirely. Reputations like the ones the White Fang and the Red Hot Habanero have don't just fall out of the sky. There's a careful pause, and then the Uchiha reaches up, pulling his mask off.
"Old wounds can run the deepest,"
he says, turning the porcelain over to look down at the pale purple front. His mouth pulls tight, as if he's remembering something unpleasant.
"Hatake Sakamoto's death sent ripples across the whole world and changed his son drastically. Kanaha's disgraced hero coming back to destroy them? I can't think of a better distraction, personally. They'll be too busy jumping at shadows to realize what's happening under their noses."
Kasame can accept that, and he's more than able to remember the way Uzumaki Kurama stood over the Kapinen as defensive as a wounded bear. There is some kind of relationship there, whether of friendship or something more, and Kasame can believe that something capable of breaking Hatake will thoroughly distract Uzumaki. Still,
"Seems like the girl's a bit of a risk when the White Fang alone would be enough,"
he rumbles, and wonders if he's pushing his luck too much. But there's no warping spiral, no hammer blow of gold chakra. The Uchiha glances over at him again, assessing and maybe a little wary, and snorts faintly.
"Believe me, Kisame, I'm well aware of Uzumaki Kushina's capabilities. But her brother loved her enough to defy the strongest hidden village to get to her son, and whether they were close or not, they're Uzumaki."
That's explanation enough, Kasame supposes. After all, when Kiri went after Uzushio, they knew from the start that they'd have to utterly destroy the entire village and wipe its shinobi out practically to the last man. If they hadn't, if they missed even a handful of survivors who managed to band together, well, there probably wouldn't have been a Kiri at all within a few months.
"Interesting technique,"
is all he offers, though.
"Big implications."
Because those two people in there are alive. Not simply the resurrected corpses Orochimaru has experimented with raising before. It's not a genjutsu, not some parlor trick that's quick to break down. Life! And out of all the crazy and twisted things Kasame has seen, that's unique. Kind of mind-boggling, too. The Uchiha's eyes drop back to his mask, and where he's holding it, his knuckles turn white from the force of his grip.
Interesting,
He repeats, grimly amused, and just for a moment he looks torn, shattered. Kasame watches his expression bleed into something so very much at war with itself that he almost takes a step back. The man's mouth forms a word, or maybe just a sound, but it's silent, and he closes his eyes as soon as he's done it, letting out a breath that's nearly a sigh. For a moment his shoulders dip, his head bows, and he seems nothing less than weary. Kasame studies him for a minute, then shifts his weight and bounces Samehada a little on his shoulder.
Got a name I can call you?
He asks, because it's been itching at him for a while now, and offers up a grin when red and black eyes open and dart towards his face. Zeniro.
Madara.
The Uchiha says flatly.
Call me Madara.
That rouses a flicker of something that's heavier than irritation, but not quite full-blown anger. Kasame stares back, feeling just the bare edge of his chakra sharpen, and says as cheerfully as he can manage,
For someone trying to create a world of truths. You're building a pretty big lie right there.
That gets him anger, sharp and clear. The Uchiha's shoulders stiffen, his head comes up, and he takes a short, challenging step towards Kasame, almost into his personal space.
It's not a lie,
He says, and there's a threat of danger in his tone.
I don't need any other name for what we're doing here. It's a placeholder, a misdirection.
A lie.
Kasame repeats, and his heart is speeding up and his chest beating faster. The excitement and anticipation he always feels before a fight, even though we shouldn't hope that this turns into one. He's pretty much indestructible, and the Uchiha is as well. It would be like throwing Kakuzu against another immortal and trying to see which one outlived the other.
I'm asking you for your name. You trusted me enough to show your face, didn't you? Why?
The Uchiha is never unmasked. Even with Zetsu, he keeps it firmly in place, and Kasame spent a lot of time thinking about that moment in the cave when the Uchiha removed it the first time. It was a show of trust that was unprecedented, something Kasame rarely got even back in Kiri after the incident with the Cypher Squad. There were words, empty statements of loyalty, but they were lies. This is action, something given only to Zetsu and Kasame. For a long, endless moment, the man just stares at him, eyes narrowed, expression faintly hostile. Then, slowly, the aggression leaches out of him, and he looks away. His fingers tighten on the mask again, holding tightly enough that the knuckles turn white.
Because besides me, you're the one closest to this cause,
He says, his tone aiming for flat, but falling short when it comes out faintly rough.
You're the one who shares my vision of a world where all dreams are possible and no one has to suffer for them. Anyone else could betray me at any moment, but you won't.
Trust. Kasame was right, and it curls in his chest like a small victory.
Don't lie to me.
He says, and it's not chiding, closer to a promise without the actual words having to be said.
Any of them, if you want to.
A tip of his head takes in the rest of the base, the other members of Akatsuki.
Just don't try it on me, and I'm with you until the end. That world you see, I want to see it too.
You will.
The Uchiha promises, quiet but steely, and glances at the door of the room where they're keeping the resurrected shinobi. A breath, a faint tightening of his mouth as he comes to a decision, and he looks back at Kasame, expression set.
Uchiha Obito. That's who I was. You can use it if we're alone.
I'm trusting you. He doesn't have to say.
Obito.
Kasame repeats and watches the emotions flicker over Obito's face at the sound of it. He wonders how long it's been since the man heard anyone speak it aloud. For half a heartbeat, he thinks of thanking him for the trust, but it goes both ways. No thanks needed for that kind of thing.
I'll steal a glance at the seals while Orochimaru's occupied then.
Obito doesn't thank him either, doesn't tell him to be careful. He doesn't need to, though, because that's not how it works between them. With a short nod, he slips his mask back on and vanishes straight through the wall, only a fading flicker of chakra to mark his presence. Kasame stares after him for a long minute before he bounces Samehada again, chuckles a little to himself, and goes to track down Orochimaru's notes without getting caught. Captivity is bombing! It's one of the things Sakamo always forgets in the rush and press of the aftermath, the adrenaline of later, but in the moment as it's happening, being a prisoner is nothing short of tedious. It's helpful that Kushina doesn't look any happier with their situation, pacing along the bars of her cell with an expression that's more suited to a caged tigress than a Patiko no Ichi. They have little to do, and with Orochimaru's little red-tailed snake coiled watchfully under one of the chairs, they can't even discuss what they can do to escape. Sakamo is fairly certain that the seal Orochimaru sketched in the air means something, but he doesn't want to bring it up with one of the man's summons right there, on the off chance that it was an absent, unconscious gesture. Better to wait until they're certain to be alone. I can't believe he's this much of a traitor! Kushina mutters, making a tight turn that swirls her long hair out behind her. It's precisely the same shit as fresh blood, and Sakamo can't help but remember his infrequent trips to Uzushiyo as a child. It was a common color there, much less so in Konoha unless something has changed drastically. It wasn't when you died, Sakamo doesn't want to say because just the word makes something ugly twist and royal in his stomach. He's managed to stop pressing his hand over the spot where his tanto slid into his skin, but more through decades of practice to keep from giving away gels rather than any sort of actual adjustment. Shinobi are good at faking mental and emotional stability, but far worse at actually achieving it. That Kushina has absolutely no hesitation, stomping right into delicate territory and setting up camp. He was creepy, but he was still loyal. I don't know what could have happened. He seemed okay with Minato being the Ondame, even if he wanted the position at first. She turns again, then throws herself down to sit cross-legged on the bed, hands on her knees, and a scowl aimed right at the snake summons. Well, she asks it waspishly, when do we get dinner? I'm starving! You'd better have ramen, you know! Sakamo doesn't quite hold his breath, but he watches the snake from the corner of his eye, waiting for something to happen. There's a long pause, a flicker of its tongue coming out to taste the air, and then the snake uncoils and slides towards the door. Brow rising, Sakamo looks from the snake to the door, to Kushina, and watches the satisfied smile spread across her face. It's a test, Kushina says, tearful again when she catches his eye. The angle of her grin still has a vicious edge to it, though. Orochimaru's never done this before, so he wants to make sure we're all in working order. Hunger's a good sign that we're alive, you know? It's easy to remember Orochimaru's questions about whether all his limbs were working. Even easier to feel the faint pangs of hunger in his own stomach, proof that he is, against all odds and his very best efforts, very much alive. With catching in his throat, Sakamo slowly copies Kushina, sinking down on the futon. He can't quite help the urge to curl his arms around himself, a fractured defense against the feeling that his hands should still come away wet with blood and bile. Sakamo had had no doubts when he made the choice to die. He had dishonored his village, his clan, his son. The decision he made had brought ruin and war and death upon Konoha, and he hadn't been able to withstand the condemnation, the stiffness in his son's face every time they walked the streets together. Kakashi deserves better, he had thought, coldly, utterly certain. Better than the legacy Sakamo was leaving. Better than a father who was a joke and disgrace. Better than a lifetime trying to escape the shadow of a man who may as well have betrayed his village. And of course he had done it for himself. Done it to escape because he couldn't stand seeing those who had been his friends, his comrades, shinobi he had saved and worked with and fought alongside, all turning their backs on him because he had valued lives over the good of the village. You were a cautionary tale, Atake. You were a warning I should have heeded, but didn't. Past service comes to nothing, orders come to nothing. There was no room for explanation, no space for mistakes, no thought given to the outcasts and the useful undesirables. Tell me, don't you feel the same? What limits are there to loyalty? Sakamo has never been entirely sure. When does loyalty cost the same as betrayal, and how does one find the line where it turns? What does loyalty to the whole matter if it isn't given to the individual? They are questions Sakamo never managed to answer once he started asking them. Questions that ate at him and bored holes right down to the center of them, and the escape from them was almost a relief, no matter what it otherwise meant.
I wonder how long it's been, Kushina says, startling him. He glances up, eyes seeking, and finds her looking away pointedly, twisting a lock of hair around her fingers like she can't be bothered to pay attention to anything else. Orochimaru looks kind of different, I think. Maybe, but not a lot. So, not too long. Sakamo just manages to force out a quiet sound of acknowledgement. Several years, he offers, because it felt like at least that waiting in between the worlds. Besides, Kushina is far beyond the little girl he remembers. She must have been 16 or a little older when he made his choice. All gangly limbs and red hair attached at the hip to the Uchiha girl from her Genin team. She's in her 20s now, probably 24, and Sakamo can't help the immediate slip sideways in his thoughts because Kakashi would be 10 years younger, 14 when she died, and he doesn't have any right to ask, not after the way he left his son. Better for Kakashi in the end not to be weighed down by his failure, but Sakamo doesn't fool himself into thinking it was painless for Kakashi either. Very firmly, he shuts those thoughts away, turns his attention elsewhere. Kushina, he says, and pretends the words don't rasp as they emerge rough against his vocal cords. Kushina looks up instantly, purple eyes landing squarely on him, and he mimics the seal Orochimaru traced for him. Do you recognize that? Do it again? When Sakamo obliges, Kushina watches his fingers with a faint frown. She sketches it herself across the floor of the cell and stares down at it for a long moment. Maybe some kind of control? She offers eventually, scratching her head. It's on a base of Uzumaki mental modifiers, but I've never seen this variation before. You swiped something from that snake man? He gave it to me, Sakamo admits, because he's fairly certain that's what really happened. Kushina's frown deepens and her eyes flicker down to the seal again. Suspicion crosses her face, then weariness, and finally reluctant admiration. If these changes do what I think they do, then it's definitely some kind of control, and it would probably take a week to adapt to our chakra so that we couldn't break it. It fits, you know? It does, unfortunately. With the time frame and the fact that Orochimaru said they would be following the group's plans whether they wished to or not. To be used against Konoha, no doubt, and the thought makes Sakamo's hands tighten into fists. He put them all in danger once. That Kushina is here, older, says that the village likely didn't end in the war he brought upon their heads, but Sakamo won't allow himself to be the cause of more death. He's caused enough harm already. We have to find a way out, he says, pushing back to his feet. He paces along the edge of the bars, testing them with his chakra for the 10th time today, searching for any gaps he might have missed before. If we can get to Konoha and warn them, Kushina doesn't point out that 2 previously dead shinobi walking up to Konoha's gates and spouting dire warning will be more likely to cause chaos than avert it. And again, she's an Uzumaki. Sakamo likely shouldn't have expected her to. All she does is stretch a little, settle into her spot, and start sketching out designs on the floor of her cell. This would be easier with ink, she complains, though she doesn't pause. Let's see, counter for control. We'll have to boost our own chakra, maybe fluctuate it to keep the seal from aligning itself properly. Clearly, there's nothing Sakamo can do to help on that front. He's a good shinobi, knows without giving himself airs that he was one of the best jonin before the disastrous mission at the end. But his grasp of seals is sketchy at best, especially compared to an Uzumaki's. He'll leave that to Kushina now and focus on the part he is good at. People! After all, if Orochimaru is working devotedly for those who resurrected them, he has no reason to give them pieces of the riddle that will free them. There's also little doubt that they can free themselves once they start trying. They wouldn't be jonin otherwise. So, a plot within a plot, it seems. Orochimaru must have his own aims, or he's not as much of a traitor as he says he is. But that last thought curls uncomfortably in Sakamo's gut, not quite settling. Orochimaru's anger at Konoha was genuine, and his derision of Sakamo's loyalty unaffected. It didn't quite strike a chord, didn't quite hit home when Sakamo heard those words, but there's a sliver of understanding as much as he hates it.
Recognition of just how Orochimaru could have fallen to that mindset, even if Sakamo knows nothing of the actual story. He takes a breath, turns on his heel when he reaches the wall, and listens for footsteps beyond his own. All the while, his mind turns the question over, seeks out the angles, judges the flaws. Kakashi isn't the only genius in the Hatake clan, after all, and if Sakamo has to match his genius against Orochimaru's much-lauded intelligence, so be it. He'll win. There's really no other choice.
Between Jiraiya's sulking, B's rapping, Roshi's pouting, and Han's exasperation, Kurama manages maybe an hour on the ship waiting to see if Ao's had any messages from Kiri before he tells the Kiri Jonin to send a messenger if he does get one, and gladly heads back to the dock. It's snowing harder than it was that morning, and there's already a thick covering on the streets. Kurama grimaces at it, not fond of the way the cold stings his bare feet, but trudges back to the inn regardless. The town is quiet, most people keeping indoors, and only a few of the most devoted merchants out on the street. Pulling his ayori a little more tightly around himself, Kurama heads up the stairs, trying not to let his worry over what's happening back in Kiri get any stronger. They're on the border between Frost and Lightning Country, and any news passing north would likely stop here, so if anything happens in one of the villages, Kurama will hear about it. Naruto is fine right now. They'll be on their way back to Water Country by tomorrow morning if Shizune clears Kakashi to travel, and that means they'll be in Kiri by the morning after that if the wind is with them. 2 more days, Kurama tells himself, and it's ridiculous, hilarious that the last few days without Naruto have felt like some of the longest in his existence, even though he once wanted nothing more than to escape the brat. The door of the inn swings open an inch away from his nose, startling Kurama out of his thoughts, and he blinks as Tsunade marches through, Kakashi a few paces behind her. The woman blinks right back, then sighs and orders, "Out of my way, shortcake. If I'm going to put up with this cloud of plants, I need a drink." Kurama's eyes narrow. "Shortcake," he repeats flatly. Kakashi eyes him and slides sideways, deliberately out of the line of fire. Of course, Tsunade just raises a brow at him, entirely unimpressed, though there is an edge of wicked humor in the slant of her mouth. "Like strawberries," she explains sweetly, tipping her chin at the top of his head. "Especially suitable since you're medically challenged." "Screw you," Kurama spits, bristling. "You're the tiny one, hag." Tsunade's smile turns dangerous, a vein all but throbbing in her temple. "What was that, brat?" she demands, grabbing Kurama by the collar and pulling him down a few inches so they're eye to eye. Kurama growls at her, opens his mouth to tell her that at least he isn't horizontally challenged and can fit through doors without his rack-scraping wood, and is suddenly hit by the perfect solution to his problem. Challenged plus bar plus Tsunade, and a bet she'll be certain she can win could only mean, "At least I'm not a wimpy lightweight," he snaps, and Tsunade growls right back. "Lightweight?" she demands sharply. "That's it, kid! Get your ass to the bar! I'll have you under the table before sunset!" "I'll bet you won't," Kurama retorts. "And I bet you that I can." They both ignore the sound of Shizune's protests as she staggers out the door, still pulling on her sandals, and Tsunade narrows her eyes at Kurama's smirk. "What odds?" "5 favors," Kurama offers. "1," she counters, giving him a shake that makes him snarl. "Do I look like an idiot, shortcake?" "Keep calling me that and you'll look like half of one," Kurama threatens, but allows. "Fine, 4.
2.
4.
3.
Deal." Shizune makes a despairing sound behind the press of her hand over her face, while Kakashi just looks mildly entertained. Tsunade gives her apprentice an exasperated look, then turns back to Kurama and challenges.
"First one to hit the floor loses?"
"Agreed." Kurama tries to bat her hand away from his collar, but all she does is shift her grip and drag him back out into the street. Kurama yelps, almost missing his footing on the ice-slick steps, but hops awkwardly on one foot to turn, gets his balance, and falls into step with her. "You're going to tear my shirt," he complains. Tsunade snorts.
"Shortcake, I could hardly make it look worse. Those things you're wearing are about 3 sizes too big and 20 years out of fashion."
"They were a gift," Kurama pries her hand off as best he can, and when she turns with a glare, he sends one right back. From a lady in Uzushio, one of the first people to actually help me, instead of just trying to cut off my head.
Kakashi makes a quiet noise of protest and is summarily ignored.
Tsunade pauses, staring at him, and Kurama thinks he sees her eyes soften. She sighs but lets go of his shirt and instead tucks her arm through his. When Kurama tries to shake her off, she clamps her fingers around his forearm and eyes him warningly.
Easy, shortcake, she says. You'll be too drunk to even pretend to be a gentleman pretty soon. Enjoy it while it lasts.
With a snort, Kurama looks away, hoping she won't see his smirk, and catches
Kakashi watching him.
He quickly rearranges his expression into a scowl and demands, "Aren't you supposed to be on bed rest?"
"No," Kakashi says easily, his visible eye crinkling, and Kurama can't tell if it's a real smile or a faked one.
"I was told to walk a bit and loosen my muscles." "Well, walk somewhere else."
Kurama huffs because if anyone can call bullshit on this bed, it's Kakashi.
He doesn't want to have to go to the trouble of thinking up another one when this is already a pretty perfect way to get the results he wants. "Mama, Kurama! Someone has to protect your virtue from Lady Tsunade,"
Kakashi protests, and when Kurama gives him an incredulous look because really, what the hell? The crinkles just deepen. The bastard is laughing at him!
Still, implying that Tsunade is going to get him drunk is the exact opposite of blowing his cover, so Kurama forces himself to relax a little, though it doesn't stop him from eyeing the Captain wearily. "Screw you," is the response he finally settles on, because it's fantastically multi-purpose that way. Predictably, Kakashi ducks his head a little, a familiar orange book coming up to hide what little of his expression is usually visible. "I didn't think I was your type," he parries without missing a beat, and Kurama is so startled he almost whacks his head on the doorframe as Tsunade hauls him into a familiar bar. She raises an eyebrow at him, but Kurama is too busy checking for a mind control seal or something on their silver-haired shadow to pay attention. What the heck happened to "Convince me you're not a threat" and all the posturing that went on last night? Kurama remembers that distinctly, and he's pretty sure he didn't say anywhere close to enough to change Kakashi's mind about anything, let alone Kurama being a dangerous chakra monster liable to snap at any moment. Even so, Kakashi flicks a glance up from the page, catching Kurama's gaze for half an instant, and Kurama's pretty certain that was meant to be a smile, or something close to one.
"Izumaki,"
a vaguely familiar voice says, amused, and Kurama turns to find the blonde bartender from the other day snarking at him from behind the counter.
"Found your mystery lady, did you? And an extra."
Her eyes slide over Kakashi, halfway between assessment and admiration, and she raises a brow at Kurama.
"Something I can do for you?"
"Sake," Tsunade answers, steering Kurama to the nearest chair and all but dumping him in it. "As much as it'll take for a pretty boy over here to start kissing the floor." "Only if you don't do it first," Kurama retorts and scowls as Kakashi lowers himself into a chair on his left. "Aren't you supposed to be walking? Get lost." Kakashi's book dips just enough for him to give Kurama a perfectly fake smile over the top of it. "I'll referee."
"I second that,"
the bartender agrees with wicked delight, dropping into the seat on Kurama's left. Huffing, Kurama sinks back in his chair and crosses his arms over his chest. "Don't you have drinks to serve?" Tsunade takes the chair across from him, Shizune hovering behind her, and her smile is dangerous.
"Leave it there, shortcake. If the lady wants to watch you humiliate yourself, she's welcome to."
The particularly toothy expression Kurama gives her is almost a grin, much the same way that Kurama is almost human. "I'm not the one who's going to end up under the table, hag." Humor flickering into irritation, Tsunade grabs two of the bottles a waiter deposits on the table and shoves one into Kurama's hands.
"Last chance to bow out,"
she tells the other woman, though her glare is all for Kurama.
"We're not going to be leaving for a while."
The woman just laughs.
"Perks of owning the place.
Kenma gets to watch the bar until I'm bored.
She points at a sign on the back wall that reads, Baicho's bar.
I'm Baicho. Now round one. On your marks and down 'em!
Kurama balls a face. It's just slightly possible he should have thought this through a little more, he acknowledges, but doesn't let the taste stop him from tipping his first cup back. He just hopes Tsunade isn't too hungover to travel in the morning. There's nothing in the entire world that will keep him from setting sail back to Naruto tomorrow, even if he has to find a boat and paddle the rest of the way to Water Country.